Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session and interview with Mike Roche. My name is Hoa Bui. I'm the immediate past president of the Actuaries Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the session today. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting across Australia and New Zealand, and pay respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'm so excited that Mike has agreed to spend some time with us today. I've always known Mike is an actuary who's gone into investment banking with spectacular success, and he has inspired a whole generation of young actuaries in the 90s to follow his footsteps. Today, Mike is a director of Wesfarmers and Macquarie Group, the number 11th and the number 5th largest company listed on the stock exchange in Australia. He's also a trustee of EISS, a superannuation fund, and Six Park Asset Management. Before his non-executive career, he was at Deutsche Bank for over 20 years, 10 of those as head of M&A, and he was chairman of Deutsche Bank mergers and acquisition across Australia and New Zealand until 2016. He also co-founded the Sally Foundation, which operates across Zimbabwe and regional Australia. He's a panel member of Adara Partners, and he mentors small business owners for Many Rivers Microfinance. In addition, he has his own advisory firm, MR Advisory. That's what the websites say about Mike. How would you describe yourself though, Mike? What would be your thumbnail sketch of yourself?
Yeah, well, I guess all of that's, factually true. I've just tried to, but I grew up in a family of 10, right? So if you grew up in a family of 10, I can remember they used to basically, we lived on a farm, they used to say, well, all do this. And I used to think, I don't want to do that, Well, so I guess what I've been doing is really just trying to make sure that I'm acting as an individual, like not so much what other people are doing, and that's probably a reaction. But how do you get out from sort of under a blanket of 10? So, like in my mind, we've just sort of said about doing things, no real goal in mind other than to make sure you keep moving forward and doing something different and always strive to the next level. And this has just ended up where the road has taken me, really, rather than knowing it wasn't a planned exercise or anything.
I just have to ask you, have you always wanted to be an actuary?
No, see, when I was at university, I didn't know what an actuary was. And I remember one day we were sitting down, a group of us, this is at Queensland Uni, and we must have been chatting about what we might do next. And probably, I don't know for sure, but probably most of these people had done, mathematics or pure maths, or, that would have been, I don't know for sure whether it was that group. And they were talking about, well, what could you do if you studied sort of in that area? And people were talking about, well, you might have to go and teach in that area or university or whatever. And someone said, oh, maybe you could be an actuary. And I didn't know what it was, right? So I went away and had a look at what this actuary thing was. And I must have got quite interested in it because I enrolled, and I've forgotten exactly how I enrolled in the Institute of Actuaries in London, directly in London. I'm in Brisbane. Probably Macquarie Uni might have been early on, probably did have something, but it wasn't really just an option. So I just started it, I don't know, it looked to be something where you could apply mathematics as distinct from just teaching it. And I think that's probably what attracted to me, the application, the practical. You could do something with it. So, but no, I had no idea what it was right until this person happened to mention it.
That's actually kind of what I had to learn as well. I had to learn what an actuary is from an engineer who is a friend of mine. And he said, oh, you're okay at maths. Maybe if you don't want to be an engineer, maybe you can consider being an actuary. And that's how it started for me as well.
It's not, it's still not exceptionally well known today. You know, I think that's one of the challenges for the profession. Like back then, nobody had heard of it. And there's probably one or two in Brisbane, in Queensland, you know, most are down here. And it's obviously better and more well known now, but still not as widely known as other professions. And I think that's probably one of the challenges, to work out how to address that.
That's right. And the Institute actually recognised that. So about 3 years ago, we started a campaign called See What We See. So it profiled many prominent actuaries, and it started me thinking about, well, who do I know that, you know, are outside of the insurance and superannuation field that is an actuary and, you know, should be profiled. So when your appointment earlier this year, I thought, oh, bingo. I've got to profile Mike. So tell us, for the audience, tell us a little bit about how you went from National Mutual, being the branch actuary of National Mutual, to be in Capel Court and then Deutsche Bank, because that's a fascinating journey as well.
Yeah, well, it was so I moved to Sydney in a bit of a hurry in 1980, just after the start of the State of Origin series. So I'm sort of, that's the only time I still think of myself as a Queenslander, right? Anyway, so I moved to Sydney.
So you were happy last night, did you?
So I'm happy as long as the game is a close game. So I moved to Sydney and got involved in quite a few interesting actuarial things. And I had a lot of opportunity to get quite involved with a guy called Ian Ferris, who was also an actuary, but head of investments at the time. And we used to often, I'm not quite sure how common this was, but we used to go out and see some of the major clients together. So you'd be talking actuarial and investment at the same time. And I got to thinking one day, look, I like the advice part. So, you know, trying to work out what you think is the right answer or the best answer and trying to advise people. I like that. And I started to think that the field, I was working in superannuation, was too limited. Like it was, well, why do I have to have these walls up saying you're really just working in superannuation? So I went and chatted to the CEO of National Mutual in Sydney at the time and said, look, I want to do something broader. National Mutual owned like 1.5, they called them merchant banks, I think, and they owned 1.5. And I said, well, maybe I could go into there. Anyway, nothing happened. And about 6 months later, I was getting itchy feet and I went to him and said, look, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go and find something different to do. And they said, oh, well, look, I thought you wanted to go into merchant banking.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, but you guys, I said, look, you can go into merchant banking tomorrow because we own 1.5. And it sort of was, so I went across on a secondment and I had no idea. And I owned one was called Capel Court and the other was a joint venture with Citibank called City National. So they said, well, you can go over there. I said, okay. So but not for a couple of months. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to take a couple of months off. So I took a couple of months off, and we made our first trip to Africa, which is
yes. Is that
and
where the photo was taken?
yeah, that's right.
Tell us about the photo.
So, and funnily enough, back then, South Africa had sanctions, and to go to South Africa, you had to go via Zimbabwe. You had to go via Harare. You had to.
Okay.
Like it's completely turned to the opposite now, but so there were no sanctions on Zimbabwe, and there were in South Africa. To go there, you had to fly to Harare. So we spent, 3 months in Zimbabwe and South Africa. When I came back, I said, well, where should I turn up? And they said, oh, in the meantime, they had merged while I was away. They merged Capel Court and City National together.
Right.
And City National was a project finance infrastructure firm, and Capel Court was an M&A firm. So it was quite a good fit. They said, oh, well, you should go off and see the CEO in Melbourne, and we've booked for you to go down there for a couple of days, and you can go down there tomorrow. Which I promptly did. And I turned up. He thought I was the IT guy coming to fix something wrong with it. No, I work for you. Bill Gurry was his name. I said, no, I work for you. He said, what do you mean you work for me? I said, well, I've just come across on some comment and I've been told I work for you. So he didn't know anything about it. I forgot to tell him. Ian Ferris forgot to tell him. So that's how I got there. I was fortunate. It happened on secondment, and I just never got around to going back, really. And after a few days, came back to Sydney and started to work in the one area that looked vaguely familiar, which was, I knew what a cash flow was, and project finance and infrastructure was all about cash flow. So I kind of knew what an infrastructure. So I started working on, back then, the very early, infrastructure projects, Gateway Bridge in Brisbane, and actually Ayers Rock Resort was privately financed, Ayers Rock Resort Complex, all sorts of projects in Western Australia, like the big infrastructure projects, but they all had an element of government support back in the early days. But that's how I got started, just sort of by accident. I didn't really know what merchant banking was, but it sounded interesting. And actually when did I join? In February. At the end of the first year, this was the end of an era then, they said, oh, we're going to Christmas lunch. And I come from a sheltered actuarial background, right? Christmas lunch was, this was a sign of the early 80s, Christmas lunch was chartering a plane and going to Barrow Waters for lunch. So, and I thought, now this is why I joined merchant banking. I knew there was a good reason, but it was the one and only time that happened. But yeah, that's how I got there.
It didn't work at all. It was the plane.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, those were very different times, weren't they? The 80s. Yes, that's right. Okay, so you were in a big group, and it owns investment banking, and that's how you went into it. But you follow your instinct that I don't want to be in superannuation only, and I wanted to branch out, and you follow your passion. So what happened? What happened that led you to Deutsche Bank? And
well, so I joined this thing called, they changed the name, called Capel Court, right? And as I said earlier, that was largely project finance, and I liked project finance. And then I started to teach myself a bit about, tax and accounting. And back in those days, there was a whole lot of structuring that people used to do to arbitrage different rules in various places. So I started getting involved. In that, and I thought that was it was sort of interesting. But and then some people might recall there were ANZ. So Capel Court was half owned by Royal Bank of Canada. So
Yeah.
National Mutual, Royal Bank, ANZ and National Mutual announced a big merger. This would have been, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 1990. And Paul Keating announced the 6-pillar policy, which nobody had ever heard of before. It was always the 4-pillar policy, being the 4 banks.
Yes.
He announced the 6-pillar policy. The 6-pillar policy included nobody could buy National Mutual or nobody could buy AMP.
Hey, yes. It was such a shock announcement at the time. I remember that.
So that was, the merger fell over, but what happened was the little banking part of it happened.
Yes.
So they had a retail bank called National Mutual Royal Bank, and they had this thing called Capel Court. Well, it became owned by ANZ, and it changed its name in 1980 to ANZ Capel Court. And we ended up being part of ANZ, which I think, to be fair, was a bit of a surprise to ANZ as well. And
they didn't want it.
And they didn't have anything to do with it. So we just carried on. We just carried on, and I started to get more involved in sort of the structuring side. So one of the things that I did back then is I started the hybrid market. You know, what is now the listed hybrid market. I created that with a blank sheet of paper back in, early 90s when I was at ANZ Capel Court.
And why did you have to create that? Why did you need to create that?
Well, because for some reason it was very, very difficult for banks to raise capital at that time. So this was a way to attract capital where people didn't take. So we were actually trying to raise ordinary capital in a price protected way. So if I bought it and it became ordinary capital where the value was maintained and the number of ordinary shares you got varied, was you took the amount you invested and divided by the share price at the conversion date. It was a way to attract capital into the banking sector because the banking sector couldn't raise any capital. So that was the genesis of it. It's sort of moved on a bit since then. So, and then out of the blue, my wife Geraldine got very ill, and so I said, look, I need to take some time off. So we took 6 months off and went to Greece, to this little island in Greece called Simi.
Yes.
And we just went there really for her to recover, really, because she had her own separate, very stressful career. And while I was away, just about everybody left. Because I think the ANZ started to get a bit more involved.
Yes.
And that started to happen. When I got back, I thought, well, where is everybody? So that's how I ended up joining what was Bain stroke Deutsche Bank then. Deutsche Bank was in the process of acquiring Bain and bought 50%, and the other 50% was an earn-out. So I left there to join. I was the attraction, which turned out to be a complete misnomer, was they said, oh, look, we can see what you've done at ANZ Capel Court. You've been involved in these big infrastructure projects. We can see this hybrid security thing. And what we want to do is, they used to do sort of tax-based structuring only, leasing and cross-border stuff. They said, we need to diversify our structured finance business. You look like the person to do that. So why don't you come here and do that, and you can work with our capital markets team, because you had to do that with, say, the hybrid market. And you could completely diversify what we do here. And I said, oh, that sounds pretty good. So I joined. It turned out to be a complete lie, really, because what they didn't tell me, and this is one of the reasons I'm very focused on that these days, but
yes,
they had a remuneration system which rewarded the exact opposite behaviour and did not reward that behaviour. So we got to the end of the first year, or halfway through the first year. And I mustn't have asked them about remuneration. Right? I mustn't have asked them, I guess.
You were very trusting.
I was. So, and what they said, well, it worked like this. I said, well, who did you work with? He said, well, I work with all these people in this global markets and these other people. And the more people you work with, the more costs they charge to your individual P&L. So they were penalising people and I said, well, look, you hired me to do exactly that.
Yes.
So it was diabolical, really, because I felt I was really lied to, right?
Yeah.
And I nearly had a breakdown as a consequence of this. It really went to my inner values, right?
And so how did you deal with that? Because, you know, the issue that you describe is actually, I experienced that myself. You know, sometime in a partnership, if you are a specialist, all the generalists would want a little bit of your specialist view. And having talked to you, they can go off and do their job a lot better. But if you don't remunerate those specialists, then they just don't get valued. And
exactly
what you say so resonate with me. And anyone who work in a real partnership.
So that's one of the reasons I'm very focused on, you know, teamwork. What are the price signals? What are the behaviour signals? And I remember the chairman, who was of Deutsche Bank at the time, came and saw me and said, "Oh, here, you know, you weren't too happy with the CEO or something." Well, that's all I needed, right? Because I 4 strips off him, you know. And as I said, that was really an absolutely terrible year. So, and what happened was, so I was in what was the structured finance part of the business, and it was still a partnership because they were buying out the previous partners. Because of the aftermath of the stock market crash, they paid the partners zero for the first half and an earn out. And each of the partners was therefore trying to maximise their own little P&L because it affected their earning. And the guy that was head of corporate finance came past my desk one day. And if you weren't hired by him, you weren't anybody, right? And I wasn't hired by him. And he threw this thing on my desk and he said, look, we've been working actually with Macquarie Bank and UBS on this complicated takeover where they wanted to do a takeover and simultaneously merge the gold assets of the target and the acquirer simultaneously and float it on the stock exchange. But the problem is they didn't own it. So I said, we've been trying to work this out. So here you are. It can't be done, but if you want to have a look at it, go ahead. Anyway, I showed them how they could do it. And so he said, oh, you better move into corporate finance. And when I got there was the start of the Victorian privatisation era, 1993. They were privatising the electricity system. I knew a bit about project finance by that stage. I had a bit of a structuring background. So I worked extensively with effectively the energy project finance team on all of those privatisations. And Deutsche had the most successful privatisation team in the country by a mile at that stage. And one of the things that I was doing was because the tax system has changed since to facilitate this, but how can you get foreign capital and Australian capital and put them in the same entity together without having the lowest cost denominator problem driving your bid price? So you had to remove all the friction costs from whichever jurisdiction these people came from. And basically that's what I did. I created bespoke investment structures for each of these big privatisations. Probably Deutsche would have been successful on 75% of them. Like, we just dominated the market. So that was sort of my early start to Deutsche Bank, really, in the first few years. And I moved around I ran a structured finance group then, and in a debt and structured capital advisory. That was doing things like and I did this for AMP and Qantas and Telstra and one of the big building companies, effectively looking at their capital structure. Did they have the right amount of capital? I remember getting asked by Leighton's, the construction company, how much capital does the construction company need to hold? And actually, that's a really hard
question.
So I turned my mind to that. So I did that sort of stuff, in the big deals that came up, they all needed structuring. So I got to start to get involved in the big deals. So I got more and more involved in M&A. And the head of M&A at the time was Hamish Douglas, the founder of Magellan.
Yes.
He was head of M&A. He said, look, you should be head of M&A. You're doing all this M&A stuff and you're not in M&A. I wasn't even in M&A. So you should be head of M&A. He probably said that because he was thinking of going to form Magellan. But anyway, so I ended up running M&A, because it was sort of what I was doing, but I wasn't really in M&A. I just taught myself the background to, the corporations law, securities law, the takeover panel, all those things. I just taught myself those things.
And it seems to me that you solve the problem, and that in solving the problem, you acquire the right skills, which led you to, some of those positions that you.
And I think the actuarial background, I think, had a lot to do with having problem-solving skills. It had a lot to do with. It still amazes me today. A lot of people just look at the short-term impact of something, whereas I'm interested in the long-term impact. Yeah. There's normally some problem to solve of some kind, whether you're trying to do a deal or you're trying to run a business or you're trying to, there's always some sort of problem to solve. So the problem-solving skills developed from that actuarial background, I think, were really important. And then trying to filter out the noise. Like if you think about what an actuary does, they really get to what is the fundamental drivers that drive, an insurance policy or the probability of it. What are the fundamental things and what's the long-term impact? It always, I don't know. I used to think that everybody thought like this, but they don't. They don't.
Yeah.
So, and whether it was growing up in part of a family of 10 and having to shut out all the noise. Well,
that might help, actually, having 9 brother and sister.
So, shut out all the noise.
Yeah.
Don't get mesmerized by the noise. Look at what's the underlying, what's really going on. What are the 2 or 3 things that really matter? And what's the long-term impact of that? And what problem do I need to solve? And I think sort of looking back on it, I think the actuarial background had a lot to do with having a developed skill in that area. And then I obviously continued to hone it in investment banking because that's all about problem solving. But when I reflect back on it, it had a lot to do with it. And the fact that a lot of people don't think that way.
I think you're absolutely right. The actuaries are trying to think a certain ways. So here are some thoughts. Do you think that we teach actuaries enough in terms of investments, instruments, and languages? Many young actuaries, particularly those who are based in Asia, ask me, how do I get into investment banking? We don't speak the same language as the investment bankers.
remember when this is not a recipe for the answer to that question. So I was at university and I thought, well, I need to get a job as an actuary.
Yes.
And I can remember hounding. I might have gone to AMP, but I remember I must have picked on National Mutual for some reason. But I remember hounding them. I used to go in there and want to see the actuary and talk to them. And I wanted, look, I wouldn't worry too much about the language. At the end of the day,
yeah,
language, well, it's really about cash flows, really. The difference in terminology is an accounting concept. Accounting doesn't really, like, to me, accounting doesn't really drive anything. Yes, I have to produce results in a certain way, there's certain standards and all the rest of it. But actually, what I really want to know is what's the underlying true financial position, be that a derivative, be that a project, be it, no matter what it is, be it a contract to support a solar farm, no matter what it is. So it's I guess you need to be able to talk more in cash flow terms, I think. Cash flow economic terms, and not get caught up in so if there's a need to convert the language, it's not to convert it into investment banking language, it's to make sure you're talking about it in economic terms, I think.
The underlying substance of the cash flows.
Yeah, because everything that, like, look at people buying Sydney Airport.
Yes.
That's all about what they think is the discounted value of the cash flows under whatever version of the operating model that they have in their mind. It happens to manifest itself as a premium to the share price, but that's an output, not an input.
Yeah.
And whether it's that or whether it's some other fancy it's the same thing. People are really looking at what's my economic exposure. So I'd be wanting to try and make sure I'm talking in those terms rather than caught up in the difference between, a surplus versus a profit or something. But it's, I think the biggest challenge about getting into investment banking is people don't really know what actuaries do. So you've got to there's got to be more dialogue around the skill set and mindset that actuaries bring to the organisation, so that the organisation can see, actually, I don't have as much of that as I should. And if you think about how's the future going to unfold? Well, who knows? But it's going through rapid change at the moment. It'll always go through change. So what's the role of people going forward? Who knows? What's critical is your ability to adapt to whatever it is that's required to remain relevant. And I think what so the challenge is to get enough dialogue going to get people educated to understand how actuaries can help you, rather than thinking actuaries and life insurance or actuaries and superannuation or actuaries in general insurance or some sort of narrow definition. That's one application only. It doesn't define the skill set or the universe. I think that's the challenge. I don't underestimate the challenge, I think, because it's not widely known, I don't think. And people don't talk about it because they don't know enough about it. So it's a one-sided conversation. So someone's not going to really, it's very hard to have a engaged conversation on something you don't know anything about.
Yes, that's right.
Because how do you get the other person to continue to keep talking because you don't know what it is you need, you don't know what the prompts are. And hence you've probably got to use, like I became National Mutual's Deutsche Bank's nominated actuary. And I thought, what's that?
Because
we
it's
had
the most senior actuary in Deutsche Bank.
Yes. Like, so who is the nominated actuary at all these major investment banks around town? But that'd be a good place to start if you wanted to. Like, if I was trying to get a job today, go back and try and pretend you're still learning this, I'd hound them to death, of course, but well, who's the appointed actuary at Macquarie? All these other fund managers that, like, who is it? Then I'd go and see them. Stalk them if necessary, but I'd go and see them, and I'd go and see their HR people, and I'd be not talking to them about. I'd be talking to them about through talking to them about, what actuaries do and how we think, etc. You'd be essentially presenting yourself as a future employee, or there'd be no job that you're actually applying for. But what you're really doing by because I think unless people understand it, but I'd be tracking down who are all the actuaries. I have no idea who the actuaries in Macquarie are, but I'm sure there are, but I have no idea who they are. I should go and ask that question myself, who's the nominated actuary, but it's demystifying it. I think unless you can demystify it for HR people, for people who run the divisions in Macquarie or wherever they might be, it's going to be very difficult, and therefore you've got to get some sort of element of dialogue going.
Two thoughts. One is, I think if you look hard in people's CV, you'll see that many prominent people are in fact actuaries. Yourself, but also, one of the chair of the Wesfarmers board is actually an AIAA, isn't it?
Macquarie, actually, yeah.
Oh, Macquarie, yes. So it's getting people to identify themselves with the profession, so that young actuaries can have role models. But from the institute perspective, what do you think we can do? This is actually a question from the audience. What do you think we can do to help that dialogue, to help promote actuaries into organizations that are outside of insurance and superannuation, like Macquarie or Wesfarmers?
Well, so I think what I'd do, this might not be the right thing to do, you see, but I think what I would do, I'd go and find out who are all these people. And as the institute, I'd go and see them. And I'd ask for their help. Well, how do I get people, if you're not there for anyone to get a job, right? That's key. So what you're doing is you're asking for most of these people are very willing to help. Nobody asks them, right? So I'd be tracking down who they all are. They'll be across fund managers, asset managers, all over the place, right? And some will be in data and digital companies, and they'll be all over the place. I'd be tracking them down, and as an institute, this would take a bit of effort. I'd be kind of going and seeing them and getting some sort of dialogue going and asking for their help, etc. Because I'm all about trying to do something practical. You've got to do something practical. If we have something which is sort of too up there, well, it's like I wouldn't write to them. That'd be a waste of time.
Yes. Speaking to them in person.
I'd go and see them and say, look, I want to come and see you for half an hour. I want to, chat to you, Most of these people, it's surprising. Like, I always thought they'd all be unapproachable, Not really. You just got to ask them.
You'll agree to this interview.
Yeah. Because see, most of them,
case in point.
Well, but I think, that always surprised me. Most of these people are if they've ended up in a reasonably senior position, they're quite, you know, a big part of what they do is to think about how do you help the world at large, and
Yes.
you know, like that's part of, maybe it's just part of getting older or what, I don't know, but so people do think about this, right? So if someone says, look, I'd like your guidance, they have guidance. They've been at it, they're in senior roles, they've seen a lot of things, they got there in a different way, they know each of their organisations backwards. And like something out of that could be, well, I'll organise for you to come in and talk to XYZ, or you know, the leadership team or something or whatever. But
Yes.
well, some of it might fall flat, of course, but I wouldn't let that discourage you. But look, that's probably what I'd do. Whether that's the best way or what, I've no idea. But that's probably what I'd do. Something practical.
Yes, thank you for that. That's certainly come down on my list to give to Elaine. I have a question from the audience who, please tell us a little bit about your philanthropy work. Because I know it's a strong part of your activities now. And tell us about what you do there.
Well, I have to confess, when I was at Deutsche Bank had like a charity committee, and I used to think, what are people doing, wasting their time with that? You know? Actually, the chairman of it happened to be an actuary as well.
There you go.
And I used to think, like, what is all that about? So I was too busy. That's what I thought. I was too busy. But anyway, I started, somehow or other must have started thinking about it. And I was talking to my accountant one day, and he said, oh, you should go and talk to my brother. Well, I didn't realise that his brother is a guy called Chris Cuff, who some people might remember as being the $30 million man who left colonial for the state, was written up in 10 or 15 years ago. Well, he set up an organisation to help people establish their own charities. So I went and saw them. Or Geraldine and I went, and my wife Geraldine and I went and saw them, and we started talking to them we did that for about a year, I guess. And what attracted us was they said, look, and we chose not to have children. Right? They said, look, if you have any money, you could leave it to somebody when you die, which is good, but a kind of bit of a waste. Or you could actually get involved and do something more actively while you're still here. And we thought, actually, that's a good idea. So funnily enough, about a year before we set up Sally Foundation. So Sally Foundation is named after Geraldine's paternal grandmother, who's actually, her name wasn't Sally, but they called her Sally. But that's where it comes from. And she was about helping people. But we had started stuff in Zimbabwe about a year before we set Sally Foundation up. So what we do is we do some projects. I'll come back and tell you what they are, but we do some projects in Zimbabwe. And then we do a number of things in regional Australia. We do nothing in the cities.
Okay.
Because we think the regional Australia doesn't have the same opportunities, and they appreciate it more, I think, because for the first reason, you know, they don't have as many. So if somebody takes an interest, they value that.
Yeah.
So what we do in Zimbabwe is we have a little partner that we found. I tracked this poor person down, and we establish community vegetable gardens where people can grow their own food, sell the surplus to the supermarket, and basically, because there's 98% unemployment in Zimbabwe, So effectively they can eat properly, effectively have a day job, which is growing food for themselves, and they can sell the produce, surplus produce, and the kids can pay school fees, etc. So we have 5 of those in the second biggest town. I used to go there regularly, haven't been for a while, regularly, and we're always trying to do, new things. When I was at Deutsche Bank, I shouldn't say this, but like I was always wanting to do something different. And I used to say to people, it's probably a bit disparaging now that I think about it. Look, if you want a photocopier, there's one over there. If it's been done before, there's a photocopier. Go and get one of them. Don't get me. Leave me out of it. If you want. So I was always wanting to look at something a bit more bespoke.
Yeah.
A bit more challenging, a bit more tailored. So one year I was there, one of the gardens adopted an aged care home, and I went there and it had this big industrial sized kitchen that was bigger than I've ever seen. And when I was flying home, I thought, why couldn't we get 3 or 4 people from each of our gardens and run a cooking school there? Like, why not? Pretty weird. So we did that several times. And the lady that ran it, unbeknownst to us, was a commercial grower herself, and she approached us and said, look, all these community vegetable gardens, maybe you could add a commercial garden to each of them, and maybe I could help you get a contract with the supermarket chain.
Wow.
South African supermarket chain. So we have our own label and brand, and I went and got a trademark in Zimbabwe, which is a bit bizarre, but and we have our own brand, and then we were there one year and someone came and put a play on in one of our gardens. And that was the impetus we run another project over there called Geraldine Roche Drama. So we run 2. Geraldine Roche Drama, which is about social messaging and produces films and plays and stuff about, teenage pregnancy or whatever it might be. And then the vegetable garden. So that's what we do in Zim.
And when did you start this?
2012, I think.
So well before it was fashionable to do so. Like the word sustainability.
We were just driven by, like, people ask all the time, like, why is it? Like, why are you interested in Zimbabwe? We don't come from there. We don't have any connection. It was just something about the resilience of the people that captured my imagination, I guess. Geraldine's been a bit of a reluctant follower, although I say, look, you've got this thing called Geraldine Roche Drama. What are you talking about? But it's just a little bit goes a long way, and the people can do so much with it. And then in Australia, Geraldine's background is young people, troubled young people. So we support young people in regional Australia, in particular, two programs at the ABC coordinate. One's called ABC Haywire, and one's called ABC Trailblazers, which is for older kids. And one of our key things is we don't want to just give money. We want to contribute our expertise with the money.
Yeah.
Right. So Geraldine is a mentor in a big way. We do some projects in Orange. Supports some of the teachers at the schools that are running these special programs. So we're combining transferring some of our knowledge and expertise together with money. That is so much more rewarding than just money. Like, money is sort of, not very interesting. And even in Zim, because we're always coming up with new things, we are. So we've now got schools involved in our gardens.
Wow.
And we're always coming up with some crazy idea, but so that's what we do. They largely are And we ran a small grants program out, and we do some stuff in Orange. We ran a small grants program out there to capture ideas from the Orange community about what they wanted to do. And, so young people in Australia and not necessarily young people, but disadvantaged people in Zimbabwe. And it's got its own website, Sally Foundation website, and Geraldine Roach Drama's got a website, Facebook page. But that's what we do, and I'm very interested in it. Right, it's incredibly rewarding, and I think the rewarding part is about whatever you've accumulated skills-wise, you can use that to help people. And that is, it's very rewarding to be able to do that and to be able to be around to see it, right? So the person who said to us, well, you can do something while you're alive, has two benefits. A, you can use your expertise as well, but also you can directly contribute to it and see it as well.
Yes, you can see the difference that you're making.
And you can make changes because some things don't work that well. You need to change it or whatever. But
yes,
that's how we got involved with it, and we're both very, very interested in it. Even though, as I say, up until most of my career, I couldn't understand why anybody would be bothering with this charity stuff.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. That sounds amazing and multidimensional. I had no idea, how many activities those foundations do. So when we write up this, we'll write up some of this content into the Actuaries Digital, and we'll include those links so that people, if they want to contribute or be part of it, they can contact you and Geraldine. Tell me a little bit about how you mentor small business, because that was also mentioned.
It's Geraldine's fault because I was in Africa.
Yes.
And Geraldine went to a function that Many Rivers put on.
Yeah.
And they were establishing a mentor program to help mentor. These are people largely in regional Australia, but it wasn't exclusively that. Young people that were actually what it was. They were starting a business, but they were previously on either unemployed or had some sort of benefit. And you think, so you're going to take them from being unemployed on a benefit, help them start a business? Like, are you crazy or what? And if they were still going after 6 months, they offer them a business mentor. So she signed me up for this while anyway. So I went and saw them and talked about it. And I think, what do I know about small business? Because eventually you work out it's all the same.
Yeah.
Right? It's all the same. Like cash flows are the same in the actuarial world and in the banking world.
Yeah.
Once you work that out, they're actually all the same. Small business, you have income and expenses and market share, and the people want it. It's exactly the same. But I thought it was different, you see. But of course, I worked out after a little while it's exactly the same. And I thought, actually, I do know a bit about that, whereas I didn't think I did. So they said, I said, look, if it have to be in Sydney. I said, no, not really. A lot of our stuff is outside of Sydney. I said, if it was somewhere on the way to Orange, that'd be good. Anyway, it turned out to be 200 kilometres past Orange. I said, I've got one for you. It's a young girl, 23, who is running a pizza bar at Condobolin. People can look it up. It's 2 hours, 200 kilometres past Orange, which is a 4-hour drive in the first place. So it's a 6-hour drive. And when I met her, she had a pizza bar. She was single. She had twins aged 2, and she runs a pizza bar at nightclub.
Wow.
And her mother lives in town, but her mother's got a job at night time. So you think, how on earth does this work? And this is where you get reminded of the resilience of people in regional Australia. And I see this in Zimbabwe as well. And you talk to her about, and then during the periods, so I've been involved with her for a few years now. You know, in the meantime, she meets somebody and has another baby, right? And I'm trying to have a conversation with her one day about, well, it was impossible to manage beforehand, but how are you going to manage? And I'm trying to work out how to have this conversation. And she doesn't know what I'm talking about. Like you ask her and she'll talk about, well, I've just got a car seat in the car where you can you can lift it out. So the baby, I just lift it out and take it and stick it on the shelf in the pizza bar. Like, what's your question again?
And you could see the obstacle.
We couldn't see any problem, like any problem. I was the one visualizing the problem, right? There were other challenges, but that actually wasn't one of them, right? So again, it's very interesting. It's not a million miles different, even though it sounds it, from being on a board. Right? I said that to someone once, and they looked at me like I came from Mars. But actually, it's her business. It's not mine.
Yes.
She's running it. I'm not running it. I'm trying to give guidance and help. Well, what's a board of Macquarie or Wesfarmers or somebody? You're not management.
No.
You're not running it. You're trying. So it's actually, it sounds weird, but it's not a million miles. Like it's completely different in one sense, but in another sense, it's actually.
You're coaching and mentoring management.
Yes, and trying. Yes. So, but that's,
How interesting the parallel between, governance and mentoring.
Like in my mind, these things are all connected. Like they look disparate. Zimbabwe looks to have been no connection. That looks to have nothing. But actually, in my mind, they're all connected. I can see them all on the map. They're all connected in my mind because it's just applying different skills, etc. And some are being amplified in different situations. But they're, I don't see them as sort of disparate things. And I'm very interested in, so time commitment is a non-event for me because, having worked in investment banking, you don't have your own time anyway, right? So I'm used to, doing stuff whenever it's required, because that's the world I lived in.
That's right. It's actually now might be a good time to ask you about your journey to be a non-executive director. So you are on the board of two very successful listed company. Tell us about that. Tell us why you make the transition, and also what is it like for an actuary to be on the board, and what does the rest of the board look to you for? Because
well, I had no ambition to go on to board. So what happened was the last job I did in investment banking was advising the New South Wales government on the privatisation of Transgrid and Ausgrid, the big electricity companies, and they retained a big stake in a couple of them. And I was setting up the governance structure for how does the government keep a big stake, but the private sector pay what I call a control premium to run it, and the government end up, how are those two things reconcilable? Well, you can reconcile it if you've got the proper governance structure. So I set up the governance structure. And then I said, look, I'm going to go now. I'm leaving. I was trying to leave Deutsche Bank you know, a while. So it's quite hard when you've been there a long time. There's always, well, no, we're doing this deal or we're doing this, you can't leave now. So I left. Anyway, and I set up MR Advisory and did the AICD non-director, you know, independent directors course, and got my AFSL license, and started doing some just private consulting work. Anyway, the New South Wales government rang me up one day and they said, we need to appoint a director to the entity that controls superannuation called EISS Super. And we know you got nothing to do because you left us in the lurch, and we'd like, and we know you had a background originally in super.
Yes.
So we think you'd be a good appointment. How about it? And by the way, we know you got nothing to do because you left us in the lurch. So I thought, well, okay.
So your superannuation background catch up with you in the end.
It did. So he must have known this somehow. I don't know. Maybe I mentioned it, or I can't remember.
Yeah.
So that's how. So I got on the board of this, effectively a trustee company for a super fund, which I'm still on.
Yes.
And what was good about it was so the biggest risk in joining a board, if you're like me, who like to do things,
yeah,
is you start acting like management. You get wanting to do all these things,
yeah.
Whereas the board doesn't do anything. If you know what I mean, the management does it, and the board is there. So it was a very good opportunity to spend time making sure I understood the difference.
Mm.
So
was it difficult to stay out of it when you know the answer?
It's not as well. See, this is where all these things add up and help. The mentor thing with the girl in Condobolin helps. You know, that was starting around the same time. It helps. You can't. Well, I can't tell her how to
run the pizza bar.
How to run the pizza bar and what she should charge for pizzas or whatever she should do or whatever. And so they were happening together. So I was probably fortunate that there were.
It's transferring the learning from one to the other.
Mm. And then I was advising a company in Melbourne who actually we're trying to do a transaction as it turned out with Macquarie Bank. And they thought they better get somebody who can even it up a bit. So somebody introduced me. So I spent a couple of years advising them. And then they said, actually, we're managing more and more external capital who want us to evolve our governance structure. So how about we get rid of this advisory business and you come on the board? Mm. And so I knew them very well by this.
Yes.
So I was the only external director on a private company board, which is a pretty unusual situation. Yes. But I was very comfortable with that. I'm still on that board.
Yes.
And then this is a long-winded answer to your question, but it is sort of what happened. And then I invested some money in one of these new robo-advice platforms called Fixpay. Yes. And they said, oh, look, we have these strategy days. If you want to, as shareholders, if you want to come down and be part of our strategy days. And I thought, well, what have I done? Nothing. So I went to a few of these and eventually they said, look, actually, why don't you come on the board? So those three private company things happened first.
Yes.
And looking back on it, and none of them were orchestrated, as you can tell, they just happened. But that was good experience because did I truly understand the difference and what the role was? And can you learn from other directors who've been at it for longer? And then somebody left the board of Macquarie, of Wesfarmers, to become the chairman of Coles. And that person had an investment banking background of 30 years. And I think they wanted to replace that skill set.
Yes.
And I happened to be, in the right place at the right time. So that's how I ended up on the board of Wesfarmers. It was just, there was a particular skill set, I think, that they were looking for. And probably that helped. A couple of years later with the Macquarie thing, a similar thing, the board was refreshing a couple of places, and they, Macquarie runs obviously I knew a bit about investment banking, and the model where you devolve a lot of responsibility down to the bankers. Well, Wesfarmers' model is similar. They run separate Bunnings and Officeworks, and there's a lot of devolved responsibility and accountability, which I'm not quite sure how relevant that was, because they both just sort of happened. Then you look around and you say, well, how did I end up on these boards when I didn't have any intention? But actually,
it's your skill set and your reputation that gets
it's very it's interesting because there's always a lot of things happening, and because in all of these situations you want to continue to grow and learn, right?
Yes.
Like you want to continue to say, well, look, I don't, what about what about digital in Wesfarmers, or what about this, or what about that, right? So it's very important for me to be continuing to learn, as well as hopefully you can contribute something as well. But it's not a one-way shop, if you know what I mean, where you contribute your skills and knowledge and you don't get anything back. You do get stuff back because you learn from other directors. Most of them have been at it a lot longer than I have.
Yeah.
So their experience, they come from different sectors. They've experienced different things. They come from different disciplines. You can learn a lot from, because you someone will ask a question and think, goodness me, that question would never have occurred to me. Yeah. And that probably happens to them in reverse. When me or someone else asks a question and they probably think, gee, I would never have. So that collegiate teamwork of, how is it functioning is people feeding off each other, is the sum of the parts greater than the whole sort of thing. So I've been fortunate. They've both been highly functioning boards and in very incredible businesses, etc., and very challenging and dynamic. So There's always something going on.
And that's the collegiate teamwork environment is a theme that runs through your career, because M&A is one environment where every discipline has to work together well. And that was something that you enjoyed for a long, long time. So
you can't do it. So what I learned from that is, and you see this around the management and board, if you want to be the top of M&A or the top of anything, or think you're the top, even if you're not, you must work with other good people. You must work with other good people. You can't, it's not something you do on your own. It's a bit like your example before of people running off and asking questions of the specialists and improving their own. You need a collection of people who each can contribute something.
Yeah, complementary skill sets that.
And you've got to be working with those people who think like, they take something they've seen in another situation, modify it and apply it here. Because using my photocopy analogy, as soon as you do anything in M&A in the public arena, it's public knowledge.
Yes.
Everybody can photocopy it.
Yes.
What you have to do is work out whether any bits of it modified would actually work in another situation altogether.
Yes.
And there's an art to that. And that's, I was, moderately good at that, right?
You were legend at that.
So trying to find, what is it about this deal? What's the unique thing about this? What's the problem I need to solve? And obviously you had a few of those over the years. And I never really thought much about it. They just went off and worked out what the problem was and solved it. Like, there was not any drama about it or anything. And it means you've got to bounce things off people, and if that doesn't quite work, what about if I do this? What about if I do that? Evolve it in a collegiate way to come up with something that works.
Thank you. That's I learned several things through that sharing. I've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I thought I run them before I ask some other questions I'm dying to ask you, because the audience doesn't get a chance sometimes to ask their question. So the first question is bringing us back to some of your comments earlier about actuaries. It's from Naomi Edwards, actually, who is the vice president of the Institute. She's also a non-executive director on Spirit Superannuation, I think. So, so her question is it better should we work as a profession harder, not to have rigid classification, you know, I'm a superannuation actuary, I'm a life actuary, I'm a general actuary. Should we not have those boundaries so that people can think more broadly? And should we then have more exams that are more generic rather than specialist exam like we do now? What are your thoughts?
Well, if you want to have categories, you need to have a number of other ones, new ones, so to speak, right? Because it's a very dynamic. You think about how data is going to be used.
Yeah.
So the role of digital, these things cut across. Like that, you know, that's a horizontal.
Yes.
It's a horizontal thing. So if one is too rigid in the vertical classifications, you're not going to be well equipped in the horizontal. So whether that means you have to lose the verticals or whether you need to come up with another model which incorporates a horizontal, I'm always a little cautious to throw out what you've got rather than modify it.
Yeah.
It's risky to throw it out. It could be better, like it might, I'm not, you know. So there'd need to be quite a lot of workshopping to work out, you know, best sort of answer. But I would think the way I would think about it is vertical and horizontal intersection. You've got to get that, because if you've got the horizontal intersection, that means you can talk to all these other jobs and opportunities and bring what your vertical knowledge, not so much the technical knowledge, but the mindset and the skill set that you apply, you can bring that to bear on the horizontal. So you don't want to be, it's a bit like what happened to me, I suppose. I was in a vertical called superannuation.
Superannuation, yes, very technical. Yeah.
And it gave advice and there was investment. And I was interested in both of those. Investment banking was more of a horizontal. It took, you know, so I think the vertical is not unhelpful, but it's not sufficient on its own.
Thank you. That's we should get you to the next strategy session of the education committee. That's such an elegant way of explaining the issue. Thank you for that. I have another question from an anonymous attendee. Mike, you mentioned that you never really had a plan for your career. What would you say then is the driving force behind your motivation and success?
Yeah. Well, it's probably a combination of things, I think. So I wanted to be recognised as an individual because of the family thing I mentioned at the beginning, right? So I think that's one strong motivator. I wanted to make a difference is not the right way of thinking about it, but I wanted to do something in my own right. I didn't want to be, part of a thing. I didn't. I like the challenge, right? So if somebody said it can't be done, that was more motivating for me than demotivating. I would think, well, only in your opinion, that can't be done.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it is actually true. You see, that sometimes it can't be done. But so the other way of saying that, I suppose, was I was always aspiring to make the most out of whatever it is I was doing at the time. It wasn't so much I knew where the road was going. I never really thought about it, to be perfectly honest. Never really thought about it. I just thought if I excelled at what I'm doing now, the opportunities will present themselves.
Yeah.
Forget about trying to map it out. I never worried about that. I just wanted to, and I think also, I thought, Geraldine and I have been together a long time, having a very supportive partner who also aspires similarly to, conquer the world. That's a big factor.
Yeah.
So just it would be harder as a soul because there are times when you need to have your confidence reinstated because what you thought was the greatest thing since sliced bread actually wasn't.
Can I ask, is Geraldine coming from a different background, like not a financial services background?
She worked in education.
Yeah, so it's quite a different perspective.
Completely different. And much more, to be honest, much more people orientated. I'm learning it, right? Much more people orientated, much more probably more community orientated, more people orientated. Hey, look, you need to think about what you're saying to people and how you're saying it, very interested in, she worked in special education and then in adolescent mental health. So, again, people who needed a bit of a helping hand. Was very, she reminded me of my, what she called my military regime when I was studying to be when I started to be an actuary, I started work at National Mutual and studied at the same time from London. I don't know when.
Yes.
You couldn't go to tutorials or anything because there was nobody to go to. But she used to say we used to have this military regime. The military regime was when I got home from National Mutual, we could have we had dinner and a 17-minute walk apparently. Not 18, not 16, 17. And then that was it. Then I would go off to, what's her name? And Geraldine was allowed to come and say goodnight at 9:30 for 10 minutes. And that's it, Monday to Friday. Saturday was all day at the university. And we could do something on Sunday. That was it. That was it for, 5 years in becoming an actuary. That was it for 5 years, right? So and she's, so that's part of it, I think. So, but I think just trying to, I think about this on the board, like, why am I there? If it's not going to make any difference, don't be there.
Yeah.
What's the point? What would be the point of being there, not saying anything, or like you might as well not be there, right? Well, I sort of think a bit about that in everyday life. Like, you have to work out, you have to have some guiding light, you have to have something to guide you. You're either trying to do the right thing or help somebody or just excel at what you're doing. And I don't think it has to be an academic career or anything, right? You look at tradesmen that make something and you think, how skilled is that?
Mm.
Like, to me, it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter. What matters, it doesn't matter whether it's, what sort of technical skill or intellectual skill it is. It's the artistry around it, what you do with it, how well you do it.
Mm.
And
the purpose, like you say.
And that's, I think that to me is the motivator. You want to, I don't think it matters that much to work out where you're going. Because if anybody can plot the future with it rapidly changing, please give me a call, because I don't think anybody knows, right? Look at the change in the last few years. What will be the future work environment post-COVID, and which business models will Apple and Facebook and all those things get broken up, and who knows? And therefore, where will the jobs be? Will they be with startups, or will they be with the big guys, or who's going to disrupt who? The truth is, nobody's got a clue. They have a view, which might be right, and they need a view to be able to go off and do something. But I think the thing that I've always thought is, if you are doing, you need to always have an inquiring mind and wonder about the answer to those things. But then try and just do the best you can at whatever it is you're doing. Like, I remember I used to, every M&A deal done in Australia, I would analyse it to death. And the people that worked for me would think, well, what are you on about, right? I wanted to understand. I always thought it was, whatever it was, that's now the new baseline. The new baseline incorporates, it's like a rising tide. If somebody does something, well, there'll be some unique feature in it. Uncover what it is, and that's the baseline. Just keep doing it, keep moving, keep moving. I think that's important, right? You've got to keep, and to me that was just common sense. It wasn't no secret sauce or anything, but you just needed to, because everything you did was public.
That's why your staff always continually learning from you. I actually know many of them, and that's what they say. They always can learn, continuing learning from you when they work.
And I'm learning from the universe. I think of it as, well, I'm learning from the universe, and then I think, okay, well, if that's the new benchmark, then I need to do better than that next time. So it pushes you to continue to improve, which is all athletes do, and everybody else. They're always just that, they're always just trying to get that little bit extra. Well, that's how I've sort of approached it. It's the same. And as long as you're striving to do that, like, whether you actually do it or not is less important. What's important is that's the way you approach it. That's how I thought of it.
It's the mindset, isn't it?
It's the mindset, yeah.
I have a question from the audience. If you were giving advice to your young self back in your actuary day, so I think back in the 80s, what 3 things would you do that you back then didn't do? What would you do differently to your younger self?
Not much. No. Not much, really. I think, and that probably tells you the older you get, the more fixated you get in your views, you see. But I think No, not really. What did I do? I tried to be very good at what I was doing at the time. I wanted to try and work with people who I thought I could learn from. I wasn't interested in following the path that other people follow, because that's their path, not mine. And if I wanted to, go and talk to people and you know, I'm not going to say badger them, but go and talk to them, and so I don't think there's much. I mentioned earlier having a partner someone that believes in you is incredibly important.
Yeah.
It could be, I think that's incredibly important. Just that, to survive the knocks that come along, to underpin the confidence and pick yourself up and keep going. I think that's important. So look, I don't know that there's anything much that I would. Could I have I didn't get into investment banking until I was 30. I don't think it held me back at all, but a lot of people are trying to get in there straight out of university. Well, and we used to, hire graduates all the time and whatever, but so is that necessary? I don't think it is. Getting experience in a startup might be better. You learn faster and you learn a lot of different things. And I think as the work environment becomes more and more challenging and involving, people will be more and more trying to hire people they think can adapt to whatever the future is, rather than the defined job that exists right at the moment, because they know that job's not going to be, well, maybe with the odd exception, in the main, a lot of those jobs won't be the jobs of the future. What they want is people who can adapt and learn, and therefore they're looking for skill sets rather than knowledge.
Let me pick that up. Do you think that actually have a role in data analytics and climate change?
Yeah, I think actually, I do, because climate change is the long-term impacts of climate change. Long-term, which ones? So yeah, I don't see. I think actually can be involved in whatever they want. Like I don't see it as being outside.
Yeah.
I don't see any of these things as being outside the domain, if I can put it that way. I think there's data. The issue with data is there'll be lots and lots and lots and lots of people doing stuff with data. But and you're going to need to do some of that to learn about data, but then don't become a photocopier and just do what everybody else does, because so you've got to still think of it as I'm acquiring some domain knowledge in this area, whether it's climate change or data. But how do I think about it? What's my mindset? What am I bringing to this? What am I bringing to this that's different? Well, maybe I'm overemphasized that, I don't know, but like to me, that's always been the most important thing, right?
Your mindset.
And what can I do that's different? How can I do? How can you sort of? Because see, the same thing is different when the environment in which it's operating is different. So if you think about raising capital for the banks, I mentioned the hybrid thing at the early on, right? The banks raise capital every day. Yeah, but in this particular market environment, it couldn't. Yes. It wasn't that the mechanism didn't work. It's just in this market environment, it didn't work very well in this market environment. So it's a multi-dimensional thing. You have to continue to look at what can be done, at this point in time, in whatever the factors are at this point in time. And it's always much more than you think, because look at, if you go back and say, well, how will certain businesses operate if we have a pandemic and lockdown? And we would have said, oh, well, they'll all have to close up and they'll all be bankrupt. Well, didn't quite happen. You know? Whereas actually they discovered all these things overnight. They created online businesses almost overnight.
Yes.
They've done all these sorts of things because necessity is a great sort of innovator. They found they could do things that they thought were impossible. I know in Bunnings, we did a couple of initiatives that we thought would take 3 or 4 years. Well, 2 weeks later, they were in.
Can you share some of them, some of the lessons?
Just like being able to, I think Bunnings, the previous CEO of Bunnings didn't believe in online. I said, look, nobody, they'll all want to come in and walk around the hardware store and choose, and I'm not having online. That was the strategy. So they were starting with online. Right now, within a very short period of time, you could order online and you could drive and pick it up in your car and work around the lockdowns and all sorts of things. And it was a fully functioning, so there's a compression. Things are being compressed. That's a function of the market and the environment. And this is why whatever you're doing, it has to be right for the moment. And this is what you find. Oh, well, X years ago, they were doing things in a certain way. Well, that's because the market environment back then was what we've got now. So this is why it's so important to keep a data bank of all those prior things. Because if you didn't understand what drove them, you won't understand whether they have applicability in the current times.
Yes, and that comes back to your exercise before. You always analyze what people have done, the latest M&A, so you can learn from what other people do as well as what you do. And
hopefully you might learn what not to do in certain markets, to avoid things happening, right? So, yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Yes. No, I think it does, absolutely does. What's your view? I've got 2 more questions, and then if there's no question from the audience, then I might wrap it up. But I have to ask you these 2 questions. One is, what's your view on climate change? What should we do? Are we doing enough? Are we looking at the right things? Are we addressing?
I think the market's taken over now. So I think it's a bit academic now as to whether that's not right. Like the hand of government and other people is being forced by the market.
And that's a good thing, right?
It's a good thing because it speeds it up.
Yes.
Speeds it up, right? Because if we can see it, like in Australia is a good example. Well, politically, we've got to navigate this group and that group and the coalition and this, and like it's like a slow moving train that often gets stalled. I don't worry too much about that because the market has taken over. The market is requiring it, whether that's investors don't want to invest in certain things, or they might invest, but they'll charge a lot for it, or so I think the good thing about, and it's about time because it's urgent.
Urgent, yeah.
It's urgent, right? And I think where it becomes really difficult is between the countries in the haves and the have-nots. Because one way of describing the climate change, and this is not, limited to me, is, well, all the developed countries They've buggered it up. And now we're saying to the developing countries, look, I'm sorry, you can't develop all that stuff because there's climate change. It's only because we've already raped and pillaged the universe and picked up all the, the benefits of that and then said sorry. So there's a major issue of equality.
And transitioning too, isn't there?
Yes, and it's, and you can just see that now in, putting Australia aside, like who's got the vaccines and who hasn't, and climate change is like that as well, right? Why should some, how do you overcome? There's got to be a retransfer of wealth, you see, and that's going to be hard.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard, right? Because you can't, like, if all the Western countries finally get their act together on climate change and all the developing countries build coal-fired power stations, well, the world's not going to get to the right place. So, well, you've either got to help them create alternative energy, and the market will do it. It's market's very efficient too. But there's going to be some pain and chaos along the way. So, yes, climate change is, but I think, obviously we, as you would expect, we're very focused on that at a board level. Investors are very focused on it. They want to know what you're doing. And they're more and more attuned to, well, there's no point if I just sell an asset to someone else and they keep doing it. Like, but it doesn't, I haven't actually, I might have helped my share price, but I haven't helped climate change. And I think as more and more super funds and stewards of money work that out, right? It's not as simple as saying make them sell it, because who to? Well,
the next guy next door.
The guy next door is doing it, so that doesn't really. It's got to be more sophisticated than that.
Yes.
That's too simplistic. But no, I think I would describe it as the market is going to force the answer, really. And it is. It is forcing rapid investment in and new processes and
it's amazing the progress that you see once the market has decided that's the right way to go. We've seen so much progress in the last 12 months, 24 months than we have in the previous 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for your thought. Those are, as usual, you put it very eloquently. So my closing question, and then I'll wrap up, is what is, you've had an amazing long career. What is the most profound change that you've lived through in that time? Now, I know I looked some of your interviews up on the web, and in the 2017, which is pre-pandemic, you said that the floating of the Australian dollars were a very, very important change that changes a lot of things in your time. What would the answer to that question be today?
Yeah. I don't know whether this is a change or whether it's just I'm aware of it now and I was ignorant of it before. I think there is there seems to be a groundswell at the moment in sort of recent times of people and organisations developing a conscience and doing the right thing. Now, and it's not just the Royal Commissions and all that sort of stuff, but which is uncovering, wrong incentives and wrong behaviour. But as a general statement, I think there are you know, there is a rising awareness.
Hmm.
A lot of people might say about time. There's a rising awareness of, are you behaving properly? Are you doing the right thing? Are you doing it for the right reasons? Are you treating people correctly? Like for many, many years, from what I experienced, like that wasn't really what people were focused on. It wasn't. You know, they were focused on the bottom line and growing market share and whatever, and they weren't focused on, you know, collateral damage in the process.
Hmm.
I think that is,
The biggest change.
I think that's a big change. People want to know now, companies, what do you stand for?
Hmm.
Like, how are you treating people who can't pay the rent during this pandemic? How are you treating your staff? What are you doing? Like, so, and that's just a localized example, but I think that is a big change. People, maybe that's more the Western world, I don't know, or the developed world, but I think that's one change I have noticed, that there's people are much, much more, and people starting work want to know whether is this the sort of company I want to work for?
That's right.
You know, so, you know, they're much more inquiring about, you know, and trying to work out whether they're compatible with that sort of organisation. I think it's heartening, I think, as a general statement, but I think that's probably one. It's not a, ultimately it is an economic change, but it's not manifesting itself as an economic change at the moment. But it's causing. But I think, you know, I think that's an important factor, and it is a big change, I think, in human behaviour, in the way of thinking about things, the way companies think about things, the way organisations think about things. And sort of what do you stand for, and whether I really want to be associated with you or not, that sort of question.
Yes, thank you. That's certainly not the answer that I expected, but it is very true. And I think it's going to be more that conscience that we've developed as a society. I think it would be a good thing that drives us forward, especially when we see, you know, some of the things that you said earlier. You know, climate change is creating inequity. Even the pandemic is, you know.
And the current, the government's pumping the world full of money. Well, that has exacerbated monumentally the gap between those that have and those that haven't. Like, the wealth of the top X in the world has been multiplied by a factor of 1,000, and either the rest of the world has either gone down or static. There's a massive. Just think of houses in Australia. If you've got one, great. You are hoping to save for one. Look what's happened. That's and this is actually government induced. That is the future problem. It's actually government that's gone out of its way, and it's divided its population. It hasn't really quite come out in those terms yet, but the government printed this money, and these are the consequences, and they've so far said it's for the better good. I'm not sure that's how it'll be seen in the future. It's creating a massive skewing, and that will have to be corrected. It won't, otherwise you'll have the French Revolution. You know, like ultimately, that if it gets too far out of the way, that's what happens. So that's the other thing that's going on at the moment, I think.
Yes, the intergenerational gap that is building up.
And the worst part is it's government induced with the best intentions, I might add.
Yes.
With the best, they probably need a few actuaries to help them work out what they should do.
Are you looking for your next gig? Thank you, Mike. That's a fantastic time that you've given us, and sharing some of those stories and your thoughts. To the audience, thank you for tuning in and for your questions. There's a feedback, which is question, which is on your screen right now. I'd like you to rate the session before you leave. But I certainly have heard a lot today. I learned a lot, you know, discipline, education, the drive to excel, to contribute. And yes, we hear from a leader who's very humble and who backing the benefit of collegiate and teamwork and creativity. You know, this is fantastic hour and a half that you've given us, Mike, and I'd like to thank you on your behalf, on the audience behalf, for spending this time with us and for sharing your amazing story. And
okay, thank you.
Anything you would like to say is a concluding?
Oh no, look, if anyone had a particular question that they want to think of later and they wanted to think, well, God, if I'd only asked this question,
yeah,
you know, you feel free to shoot them through. Like you know, I'm happy with that. So that if there is anybody, if something comes up later, then just give us a yell.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We'll certainly make that offer when we publish the write-up of the interview, and yes, that will be great, because I think some people had to leave at 1 o'clock, so they couldn't stay for. But these sessions are often read and listened to much later on our website. So thank you very much for the offer. And
all right.
have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Wa. Thank you.